if I won $100 million tonight, this is exactly what I would do. Real numbers, a clear plan. Because without a system, money disappears faster than you think. Hi, my name is Becky, and welcome to the channel where we talk about money, life choices, and what it actually takes to build financial stability and wealth in the real world. In one of my previous videos, we talked about why most lottery winners end up losing everything again. If you haven't seen that one yet, I'll link it somewhere so you can go and watch it after this one. But today we are flipping that around because instead of looking at what goes wrong, I am going to show you exactly what I would do differently, step by step, with real numbers and a structure that turns one moment of luck into long-term wealth. So the first thing I would do is not say a word. And I mean that very literally. I wouldn't tell my friends. I wouldn't tell my family. I wouldn't casually mention it to anyone. I would keep it to myself. Not because I don't trust people, but because I understand what happens the moment that information gets out. Because once people know, everything changes. The way people start talking to you, the way conversations change, the way expectations slowly creep in, and before you even realize it, you're no longer just dealing with money, you're dealing with people. With opinions, with ideas that aren't even yours to begin with. And that's when it becomes dangerous. Because now every decision you make is no longer fully your own. There's pressure, sometimes direct, sometimes unspoken, but it's there. People will have suggestions. You should invest in this. You should help with that. You could do something bigger. And again, not because they mean harm, but because money like that affects everyone around you. And if you're not careful, you slowly start making decisions to manage other people's expectations instead of making decisions based on what actually makes sense. Because the moment you start listening to those ideas and act upon them, that's the point where your control starts slipping. And suddenly you're moving faster than you should, thinking less clearly than you think you are. So for me, the priority would be very simple. I'd protect my thinking, I'd keep that space quiet, and give myself the time to fully understand what I'm dealing with before anything else starts influencing that process. Because this kind of situation doesn't need speed, it needs clarity. So before any plan, before any investment, before any decision at all, I'd make sure of one thing, that whatever comes next is actually my decision. And that's why the first step is not about money at all. It's about staying quiet and in control. So after keeping it to myself, the second thing I would do is also nothing. I'm sorry, you're probably thinking, what is going on? But this time with the money itself. So I wouldn't start investing immediately. I wouldn't start moving things around. I wouldn't really feel the need to do something with it right away. And I know that might sound a bit strange because the moment people think about that amount of money, they think it has to be put to work as fast as possible. But that's exactly where things go wrong, because speed creates mistakes. And mistakes at this level are expensive ones. So instead of rushing into decisions, I would just let the money sit. Not forever, of course, but about 3 to 6 months, which should be long enough for the situation to become normal. Because in the beginning, nothing about it is going to feel normal. It's exciting, overwhelming. It changes the way you think. It changes your possibilities. And those are not the conditions where you make long-term decisions. So I would give myself time to adjust to it, to get used to seeing that number without feeling like I need to act on it. Because the real danger isn't just bad decisions, it is rushed decisions. Those that feel right in the moment, but don't hold up over time. So once everything is quiet and I've had the time to actually think clearly, this is where I would start putting my life in order. Not building anything yet, not investing, just fixing what is already there. Because I don't want to grow money while something in the background is still working against me. That just doesn't make sense. And for a lot of us, that starts with debt. But not all debt is the same. So I would really take the time to look at it properly, because some things are just draining you and others are more nuanced. Credit cards, for example, those are usually the first to go because the interest is just too high. 15, 20%, sometimes even more. That's not something you manage. That's something you remove completely. Same with a lot of personal loans. If the interest is high, it is working against you every single month. So that's an easy decision for me. Gone. But then you have things like student loans, and those can be very different depending on the situation. Some are heavy, some are more manageable, so I wouldn't just wipe those automatically. I'd actually look at the interest, the structure, and decide from there. And then you get to something like a mortgage. And this is where a lot of people think it's fine, the interest is low, so they just let it run. But if you actually look at the full picture over 20 or 30 years, you're often paying back more than double the price of the house. And that is insane. It doesn't have to be like that, because something as simple as making a one extra payment a year can cut years off that loan, sometimes close to 8 years. And suddenly the total amount you pay makes a lot more sense. So again, I wouldn't just ignore it, and I wouldn't blindly pay it off either. I would actually look at it and decide what makes the most sense long term. And the same goes for something like a car. Maybe there's still a payment on it. Maybe it's not huge, but it's still something running in the background. So I would ask myself, do I want to keep this, or do I just clear it and simplify everything? Because that's really the goal in this phase, not just clearing debt, but simplifying my life. Fewer payments, fewer obligations, fewer things pulling money away every month. Because once all of that is cleaned up, now I'm not fixing the past anymore. Now I'm in a position where everything I do next actually moves me forward. There's nothing working against me anymore. And that's a completely different place to build from, because now the money I have is finally free to work for me, instead of constantly being pulled in the other direction. So once everything is clean, this is where I would finally start building, but not just investing and hoping for the best. I would already know how I'm going to live from it. So let's say I'm working with $100 million. I take 3 million and set that aside as a personal buffer. That money just sits there. That's peace of mind. That's freedom. That's I never have to make a bad decision because I need money. Then the core. 70 million goes into investments. And when I say that, I mean broad index funds like the S&P 500, a global index funds, nothing exotic, because I'm not trying to be smart. I am trying to be consistent. Let's say that gives me around 7% per year after inflation. That's about $5 million a year. And this is where it becomes real, because now I need to decide, how do I actually use that money? And this is where something like the 50-30-20 rule suddenly becomes very interesting, because normally that rule is 50% needs, 30% wants, 20% savings. But at this level, I wouldn't apply it in the same way. I would flip it completely. So out of those 5 million a year, I would roughly do this. Around 30% I actually live on. That is 1.5 million a year. And let's be honest, that's more than enough to live extremely well. Then another 20% I keep flexible. Lifestyle, travel, bigger expenses, that's another 1 million. But the key part is this. The remaining 50% goes straight back into investing. So another 2.5 million every single year goes back into that 70 million. And then something crazy happens, because now you're not just living from your money, you're growing it faster at the same time. Because that's where compounding really starts to accelerate. And then there is real estate. I would invest about 20 million, and I wouldn't just buy property. I would go for income producing assets. Think small apartment buildings, multifamily units, maybe a few well-located rental properties in strong cities. Not luxury homes that just sit there, but properties that bring in rent every single month. Let's say that averages around 5% net. That's another 1 million a year. And that money I would treat as stable income that can either fully cover my lifestyle or be reinvested completely, depending on how aggressive I want to grow my capital. And yes, that income is taxed. Same with anything I pull out of the investments. So I'm always thinking in net numbers, not gross. But even after taxes, this system still works. But the key is this. Now I have two systems, investments growing in the background and real estate producing cash flow every month. And because I am not spending everything that comes in, both of those systems keep getting stronger over time. And that's the difference. I am not living like someone who just got rich. I'm operating like someone who wants to stay rich and keep growing. Because the rule stays the same. I don't spend the 100 million. I live from what it produces. And even then, I don't spend all of that, because that's how you turn one moment of luck into something that keeps expanding over time. So now you're not just living off money, you're building something that keeps growing. And the interesting part is, even at this level, structure still matters. I'm still using a framework. I am still deciding where money goes instead of just spending it. And that brings up a very interesting question. because something like the 50-30-20 rule actually worked really well in this situation, even though I flipped those numbers around. But what about in real life? What about when you don't have millions and you're just working with a normal income? Does that rule still make sense today, or is it completely outdated? That's exactly what we're going to break down in the next video. So if this kind of content interests you, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!